Hey everyone, I hope you're having a great May Day and an excellent first day of Unit 2. I've enjoyed getting to know you through your discussion introductions as well as some emails that you've sent me. Keep up the great work. I think we're off to a wonderful start for our intercession course. I did want to point out that I have just finished scoring all of the What is History discussions for Unit 1, as well as the work on Twitter for Unit 1. So remember that for Unit 1, what you needed to do on Twitter was different than what you'll need to do for Units 2 through 6. For Unit 1, you needed to just post 3 tweets. The first of those should explain the difference between primary and secondary sources in a concise way. And then the other 2 should provide a link to a primary source and a link to a secondary source on either New Mexico history or Southwestern history. Great job on that. I posted a couple of follow-up questions, so please look at those as you go to work on your Twitter posts for Unit 2. Also, if you're showing a 0 for the introductory Twitter posts, yet you've done work on Twitter, please just send me an email or mention me on Twitter at CNMBrandon. All that means is I haven't seen you there yet. So it's possible that you could be there and you just forgot to use the course hashtag or something like that. So if that's the case, please let me know as soon as you can so that I can give you credit there. Also, if you missed any of the Unit 1 assignments, you can still complete those. Please do so as soon as you get a chance. Let me know if anything has come up and you're having difficulties keeping up with the pace of the course. I'll do what I can to help. At some level, the course just is intense because we're getting everything done in 2 weeks. But again, I'll do everything in my power to help reassure you, give you hints and ideas for working on what we're doing together in New Mexico history. A couple of things I just wanted to mention about the study of history and historical thinking. I always love reading through the responses that you all post to the questions about how you define history, what you think of when you think of historical thinking, and those kinds of things. Historical thinking, of course, is asking how we know what we know. It's all of the habits of mind, the thought processes, the questioning that goes into figuring out what happened in the past. And of course, as many of us commented, trying to study the past is like trying to put together a puzzle. Except we're never going to have all the pieces and we don't have a picture to work from. So it's even more difficult than putting together a puzzle. It's important, though, that we come up with and search for as many different perspectives on past events as we possibly can so that we can understand how power relations have shaped what we know of history, how the stories of marginalized people, people who were not in power, usually those tend to be people of color. Those tend to be people who didn't have written traditions, at least in 1,000 or so years back. And so the question becomes, how do we recover their histories and how do we add their voices to the story? Unit 2, we'll talk quite a bit about that, so keep those questions in mind as we go along. Also, I wanted to emphasize something that I think is a common idea when we come to the study of history, is this notion that somehow primary sources are more credible, more correct, less biased than secondary sources. Of course, primary sources are those that were created at the time of the event. They include a range of things from artifacts that archaeologists would study. They could include photographs. They could include film, paintings. They also include things like a person's journal entries, letters to each other, official documents, anything that was created at the time of the event that we're studying and that's related to that event. So historians kind of define primary sources a bit more broadly than some other disciplines do. But because of the nature of all of the types of sources that I've just mentioned, primary sources actually have maybe a greater propensity to be biased, or at least to not be honest about their biases than secondary sources. Of course, you can have poor secondary sources that can be horribly biased, not be aware of it, that kind of thing. But generally, secondary sources are those that are put together by scholars, people who have been studying events of the past, and people who are, for the most part, again, in good faith, trying to put together the best picture of past events that we can possibly get to. So they will take into account multiple perspectives. They will read their sources critically, and they will point out where a source is biased as they go along in creating and writing their narratives about the past. So again, those are things to look for in the best historical accounts. Keep in mind the biases of primary sources. People who are closest to events, often tend to have kind of the most short-sighted perspectives on things. They tend to have axes to grind. They tend to create sources, written petitions, for example, because they have a stake in a certain event and they want to see a certain outcome. So again, they're going to be biased in the ways that they see the world, the ways that they report on things. That's not necessarily a problem. And the term bias, even though I think sometimes it has a negative connotation, isn't something that we should look at in a negative way. It's just something we should be aware of. And we should realize all of these sources are biased, and we'll figure out where those biases are so that we can better understand the past. Figure out where our own biases are so that we can be more open-minded. So hopefully those are things that we can keep in mind and work together on over the next couple of weeks. Again, please ask questions whenever you have them. I'm looking forward to studying the history of New Mexico's earliest inhabitants with you all.